Olaf Blanke, I'm a medical doctor by training, did a PhD in neurophysiology on eye movement control. I'm an assistant professor of cognitive neuroscience at the moment at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, Switzerland, and I'm also a neurological consultant at the University Hospital in Geneva, Switzerland. So what the work in my lab focuses on, we are multidisciplinary teams, so there's medical doctors, biologists, psychologists, physicists, engineers, computer scientists. What we're trying to understand is how the brain represents the own body. So body representation, how the brain represents the body. So an example would be this arm or this arm, how is this represented in the brain? Representation means what are the systems representing this. An example you can give, like I can look at my hand, my left hand, and this goes to the visual brain. I can close my eyes and I still feel exactly where my arm is. And this is a sensation, a tactile sensation, proprioceptive sensation where my arm is. And we're looking at how are these two representations, a touched representation of my arm and a seen representation of my arm, what puts these together? Because I have the experience of just one arm. So we look at this for arm representations, but also for full body representations, because there are similar mechanisms about my own, my full body in a sense. So, and other questions are, what helps me distinguish my body from your body? Because from the brain's point of view, it's not evident, right? So, and we're looking at these questions in using psychology, experimental psychology, doing behavior and presenting stimuli, and people have to respond fast and accurate. We're also using questionnaires to ask them about their experience. And most importantly, we do neuroimaging, brain imaging. So we look, when people do these kind of tasks, is this your hand or is this another person's hand? Which brain area is involved in solving this task? So these are the three levels that we're doing. So the classical, it's the cognitive neuroscience of body representation. Yeah, for the moment, I wouldn't have a definition. I'm very new in this field because, as I said, I come from cognitive neuroscience and neurology. And for the moment, I'm most aware of definitions of presence, defining it of being here or being there. So the being there, it's a spatial way of formulating where I am localized, where the self, the I, is localized. And presence and virtual reality are ways of studying the mechanisms, functional, behavioral, and brain-wise, to manipulate this sensation. So presence meaning I'm present now here in this chair, my right leg above my left leg, and I'm looking this way. Well, this is one way of being, and I'm present in this way, or it's my experience of being present in this way. However, this can be manipulated, as can be done in out-of-body experience, where all of a sudden I will have the experience of being present under the ceiling. So and such mechanisms we're trying to understand actually also. But presence would be the lowest definition, or the easiest definition of presence would probably be this spatial core. Where is the basic center of my awareness localized, and what are the mechanisms involved? I think it depends. As in other fields, connection between certain people coming from different fields and focusing on those aspects. I think, again, I'm not absolutely familiar with the field of presence research as a whole. I have very focal contacts with presence researchers who are interested in the same questions we are interested in. And I think, and then depends. I think it's good maybe to have different approaches, different foci, and try to see how these come together at a later point, maybe, yeah. I think it will become it's a scientific field. It's related to engineering, it's technology. It's very much dependent on technology. So there was always new techniques coming in, replacing all the techniques. Maybe there's not yet a gold standard that everybody will use for the next 10 years. Because in that point, so if somebody has just a technological advance over other groups, we will still be talking a lot about technology. In my field, there was such a leap having function MRI or neuroimaging techniques. So if you had that technique, you could do studies nobody else can do. And so there is a technological gap. And this field of neuroscience was also technology-based. But now we're in a level where everybody has the same technology, and I think maybe this is still coming for the field of presence or virtual reality. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think computer science is important in combination with engineering. I think these two have been the driving forces. And then there is these fields of science who can make great use of these, and in collaboration and in the future. And I think that is psychology, experimental psychology. And my field, which is neuroscience, neurology, I think it could be important to understand certain conditions much better, even for diagnoses for certain conditions in neurology, also psychiatry, presence-related technologies. And then there's other ones with which I'm less familiar. I think there's great use for the arts. There's great use for applications in the medical field, in computer game industry. So I think it will always remain a very interactive, multidisciplinary field. It's basically reading, basically a general interest. I mean, since we're looking at body representation and self, what is a very basic form of self? Where am I in space? Presence links by the phenomenon. I mean, we're trying to describe it in brain states that account for such experiences. And the field of presence research has developed tools that allow to manipulate or allow to systematically study these aspects. So I think the phenomenon is the same or very related to what we study already, but we had a different perspective on it. We looked at patients, neurology, psychiatry, healthy subjects. How can we modify a sense of presence or self-location? Where am I localized in my body, in this room at the moment? And we're trying to look at these mechanisms, and this brought me to the field. And as always, you start reading one article, two articles, but it was never anything that I learned in my studies. It rather came during the research career, basically, that you start feeling a theoretical affinity with that field. And that's then one thing comes to the other. I think it's a very hard problem from a scientific point of view to really understand what presence is. To really nail down the few mechanisms that would explain it all, like in physics, like gravity. No, I don't think we'll come up with something like that in presence, or maybe we will. But I mean, it's a rather new field, and I think there is still a lot to be developed. But I think there is a relationship of these findings, if they come, with respect to other fields that are adjacent. It might be relevant for philosophy, it will be relevant for psychology, for neuroimaging, and it, at the end, interests everybody. We all want to find out who we are, what makes this moment special, the now of experience and the where of experience. And so these are open questions, and the field of cognitive neuroscience started looking at it over the last 5 to 10 years, more and more. So there's an interesting research field that is in development that's also new for the cognitive neuroscience. And I think it's the right moment to fuse interests. Education might be a way of school education, for example, postgraduate education. In the Geneva University Hospital, I think virtual reality and related applications are used in order to plan the operation before you do it. Young neurosurgeons, for example, can already, in 3 dimensions, relive much closer what the main surgeon is actually doing. This would be one application. Teleoperating systems, but making you present at higher levels in certain at websites or in certain 3-dimensional cues. It can help you probably in architecture. I mean, I could envision lots of applications in order to, not just for the user who wants to build a dream house, but also for the architect planning it. This is, I think, must be fantastic for an architect to see the house. You know, at the time you drew it, and a lot of was going by mental imagery. I mean, the great architect, I don't know, in the Renaissance, I mean, you drew it, but you had to completely imagine it in 3D. Today, you can ideally, in a high-level virtual reality environment, you can and could probably walk through it and find certain mistakes, make this better, or see that one idea works less well. For education also, for brain science, which is an interest I have, brain anatomy is very complicated. Although it's only 1.5 kilograms that our brain weighs, there's a tremendous amount of three-dimensional folding going on. And normally what you used to do at the time is by cutting the brain that you learned the anatomy. But you did this for, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, and then you finally learn how the brain is built. But of course, by having three-dimensional animations and getting motor cues while you're looking at the brain might be an interesting way to render more evident spatial aspects. And then again, take it more classical applications to the clinic, as I said, diagnostic, something you simply cannot test with a normal paper and pencil test or a normal computer screen. To render something more realistic is good for diagnosis, but also for rehabilitation, I think. I would like to see virtual reality environment and presence-related question as well-established techniques in the cognitive neuroscience, that there are certain well-established paradigms that my lab uses, that other labs uses, that we can agree on, that there's a basic equipment that many labs can afford. So even though it has gotten much cheaper, it still needs to get much cheaper because otherwise it's much too restrained. And systems should get more user-friendly, I guess, that you don't need heavy loads of engineering power and people just to do a very simple experiment. I think there's still a lot to be done to make it even more simple, but I think this will come in any way. So. I think before it's very difficult to see. I think one has to see how it evolves and look at it closely. What is important when there's ethical issues, it should be a good team who evaluates the ethical risks or not. Certain medical conditions, it might be contraindicated to apply virtual reality a lot. One can see obvious ones. Is it good for a 4-year-old kid until it's 14 to spend 20 hours in a high-level virtual reality computer game? Yeah, probably not. But I think this has to be seen, and we really have to see what the effects are. I mean, there might be certain abilities that are just strengthened very much. It might be very good to actually have these environments, and one shouldn't just see it as a bad computer game. One has really to see and look what the effects are and do studies and see whether there's an effect or not. But it's important, I think, in today's world anyway, that ethics evolve with technologies, but not too late, not too early, not too restrictive, but in parallel that these two lines evolve. Very egocentric kind of view, but head-mounted displays make them lighter, more easy to set up, bigger fields of view, affordable. If that would come and tracking system, if head-mounted display and tracking system, in my opinion, would work at a lower budget, again, that would, I think, be of a great advance. Otherwise, full-body tracking is still complicated, and if you think about that, we have to control for eye movements, for head movements, for eye blinks, for all bodily movements we do. There's a lot still to be done, but what probably needs to be done also is how can we reduce this amazing amount of information that comes from our body and just control and track the pieces of information that the user most strongly relies on, and maybe focus on these. But this we still don't really know. So. I would like to explore the possibility whether selfhood, what I am, how far we can go to really attach it to an avatar that is animated, what is really needed to really take it to a higher level, and to then use this to explore it systematically. Another idea would be to use virtual reality to induce something that's closely related to out-of-body experiences. So those would be two very immediate goals. More long-term would be how these predictable states that you can induce by virtual reality are related to brain activity. But I think we're still far away from that second goal. But this would be the real dream, like understand which areas in which activity patterns relate to certain forms of well-defined presence. I think it will not change it because it might change our understanding, but what everybody thinks about me or you or somebody else, I don't think that will profoundly change unless you spend your whole life in such an animation. But I think science has found a lot of explanations for illusions. I mean, we'll still find a rainbow magnificent, although we just know it's the same color of light, it's just refracted in different ways. I think we love our experiences, our selfhood, and what makes us human. We still love it, and I don't think virtual reality will modify it in a very systematic way, because after all, we live out here without virtual reality equipment. But our understanding of all these phenomena, I think they will be modified, yes. It hasn't really been my research in presence, but certainly to some extent work with a number of conditions where this basic center of awareness that we all have, where we localize the self, can be profoundly disturbed. And to see that for others, so I assume the same mechanisms are present for me, are localized in some brain areas, and a simple manipulation suffices to modify this representation. Yes, this is very intriguing, and it works, as I said, as an explanation for the general population, but when you apply it to yourself, there's always some limits that you prefer to just leave unexplained, I think, yes. How does the brain generate my visual spatial perspective of seeing this scene from here? Why is it body-centered? Why is it body-centered that I experience myself to be? I experience it to be here and to have this point of view, not just visually, but also perception-wise. How is this generated? And which would be the main brain areas involved in this?